disassemble the new caliper. Take the caliper off the bracket, 17mm socket. It's easiest to do if you have an impact of some sort. There's one, two. Set this aside, and let's prepare the bracket for installation, which requires lubricating these areas with brake grease, right where the anti-rattle clips sit. You don't want rust building up in here, so that's why we're putting grease, but you want to put a thin layer because you don't want it to squeeze out once you put the anti-rattle clip on and get onto the rotor. Then you'll have braking issues with grease on your rotor, of course. All right, that's enough. Take your anti-rattle clips that should be provided with the caliper, slide those on. They should slide on easily. Of course, do the same to both sides. And we're not done yet because even though this is a brand new caliper, it does not come with a whole lot of grease on these slider pins. As you can see, there isn't a lot. Got some debris on there. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some, but I can't add it to the slider because as I slide it in, it's going to get wiped off. So what I like to do is actually put it inside of the boot, like this. Not a ton, but just enough to basically make a little reserve of grease in there for when it's needed. And then I'll add some to the slider pin, just on the outside. And make sure this little ridge up here is coated because this is where the boot seals up. And if it's not greased up, then over time it's going to let water in, and then you'll have rust building up inside of here. The pin will seize up and so on. Slide this in, push it in all the way. If there's excess air in there, just squeeze the pin and squeeze the boot. That'll push the air out. Give it a couple twists just to work the grease in there. All right, wipe off any excess. And now we are ready to put this onto the vehicle. With a 22mm socket, let's remove all these caps that hold on the center cap for your lug nuts. Set this aside, and then with a 22mm socket as well, go ahead and remove all 8 of your lug nuts, and then we'll remove the wheel. The first thing I want to do is break free this Banjo bolt with an 11mm socket. It'll be easiest to do now. Fluid will want to drip out. Now we'll close it up just a little bit just to make it stop dripping. This will make it easier for the bolt to be removed later on if it's not stuck in there. With a 17mm, I want to break free these 2 bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. There's one. Right about there. So I'm going to hold my slider with pliers. That way it prevents it from spinning. And I'm going to try and break this free. There we go. Remove the 2 bolts. Take your caliper and set it up on top of the leaf spring here. It can just wait here for you until you're ready to put the new one in. Remove the pads, set those aside as well. And now with an 18mm, let's remove these 2 bolts. There's one. And there's 2. Take the bracket off. Take your new prepped caliper bracket, slide the bolts through. If you want to put anything on them, go ahead and put some thread locker on. Definitely don't put any anti-seize or grease or anything like that. Line up your 2 bolts and start them in, and then torque them to 122 foot-pounds. That's 1. And that's 2. Take your pads, slide them onto the new bracket. Make sure they slide in easily. There we go. On the new caliper, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the 2 outer rings of the pistons here. This is going to help the brakes operate quietly and smoothly, just like this. And then I'm going to put some on these 3 ears of the caliper as well for the same exact reason. You don't need a lot, just a little thin layer will do the trick. Slide your caliper over, line it up, and start in the bolts. There's 1. And 2. Let's torque these to 80 foot-pounds. There's 1. And 2. Let's break this banjo bolt free again and just completely remove it from the caliper. Again, I have a collection bucket underneath collecting all this fluid that's dripping. Okay, set your caliper aside into your collection bucket, let that drain. As you could hear, one of my copper washers just fell off, which is perfect. Remove the banjo bolt and make sure that it comes off with this old copper washer. You don't want that to stay on here. And speaking of the hose, make sure there's no debris on it. Wipe it off a little bit. And then I want to take the new banjo bolt. Take the new banjo bolt, leave 1 washer on it, stick it through the hose, put another copper washer on it, and then start it onto your new caliper. Okay, that's bottomed out right there. I'll give it a quick snug, and then I'm going to go about half a turn, between a quarter and a half a turn, about a third. Feels just about right on this. Basically what you want to do is compress those 2 copper washers and make sure that they make a nice tight seal. So, yep, this feels pretty good here, about a third of a turn for me. And at this point, we want to move up and open up this bleeder screw with a 10mm socket, and that's going to let the gravity do its thing and bleed the air out of the system here. Take this boot off. $10mm socket or wrench. Open this up, and like I said, let gravity do its thing. After this, once air stops coming out and it's all steady stream of fluid, we will perform a manual brake bleed, and that consists of having someone in the vehicle pumping the brake pedal and then holding pressure after a few pumps Of course, you want to check your master cylinder, make sure that's full first. And then with pressure being held on the brake pedal, go ahead and open up this bleeder. Just be careful because fluid will come shooting out with potentially some air. Once the pedal has reached the floor, close the bleeder and repeat the process until you have no more air bubbles coming out. And then at the end, you'd want to top off your master cylinder. But for now, we'll wait for the gravity bleed to be done. All right, we have fluid coming out of here. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this back up. And now we can perform our manual brake bleed, which I'm not going to show you, but I went over it, so go ahead and do that. After that's done, you can cap off, well, first of all, clean off your mess. You don't want remaining brake fluid here because then you don't know whether it's a leak or if it's residual. And then, of course, cap off your bleeder screw and then pump up your brakes, and let's put the wheel back on. Whoa. Let's put the wheel back on. Put all your lug nuts on, bottom them out, and then torque them to 140 foot-pounds. Just double check them all one more time. Don't forget about this cover if you have one. Again, 22mm socket, just like we did to take it off, except for this one. Don't use an impact gun or anything like that on it because these plastic inserts, they strip out really fast and then they won't grip, and then your cover is going to go flying down the road. So just do these by hand, make them nice and snug, and you should be all set.